She was the girl with the trembling voice that seemed to belong to someone far older, a voice that could cradle a nation's sorrow while her own heart went unheard. They placed her under bright lights and told her she was America's sweetheart, but the sweetness came at a cost. She smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. Contracts were signed before she could understand their weight, promises inked not in kindness, but in control. Studio hands pressed pills into her palm as if they were lullabies, soothing the exhaustion they themselves had created. The role made her famous. It also broke her. She sang of rainbows, of hope, of freedom, yet her life was measured in call sheets and clocked rehearsals. No one dared ask. She never told, until it was too late. Even love arrived dressed as performance. Producers, husbands, co-stars adored her brilliance but dimmed her spirit in private. They clapped when she entered the room, but no one noticed when she left. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. And though the audience believed the kiss, he'd already fallen out of love. In her songs there lingers a haunting irony. A girl who gave the world its dream, but never truly held her own. Errol Flynn was laughter set loose on the screen, a blade flashing beneath chandeliers, a grin tilted like a secret only he could afford to keep. He made freedom look effortless, as though the world were made of champagne bubbles and duels he always won. Yet what the camera captured was only half the story. Corruption, like a silent understudy, followed him from set to set. Trials whispered his name, scandals clung like shadows, but somehow the curtain always rose again for Flynn. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt. Still, the studios polished him until he gleamed, because a star that bright was too valuable to dim. No one dared ask. He never told, until it was too late. The role made him famous. It also broke him. He lived like the pirate he portrayed, fearless, indulgent, untouchable. And the more audiences adored his daring, the more he was shielded from consequence. The audience believed the kiss, but he'd already fallen out of love, with rules, with restraint, with himself. He bargained away integrity for legend, and legend won. Yet, behind the grin that charmed the world, the silence of regret waited, patient as the tide. She carved herself out of shadows and mirrors, teaching the world how to look at her, how to believe in the myth she built. Every gesture rehearsed, every photograph a weapon. She smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. Joan Crawford was not born into glamour. She constructed it brick by brick, a cathedral of ambition standing against the storms of a ruthless industry. The role made her famous. It also broke her. To the audience, she was elegance incarnate, resilience in satin. But those closest to her knew the other price. Tenderness traded for control. Love exchanged for loyalty at any cost. She demanded devotion and purchased it with fear, with charm, with the sharp edges of her will. No one dared ask. She never told, until it was too late. They clapped when she entered the room, but no one noticed when she left. Her children, her lovers, her friends, each shaped into reflections of her hunger for permanence in a town that forgets too quickly. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. Perfection was her armor, her battlefield, her undoing. And though her screen legacy gleams, behind it lingers a woman both master and prisoner of her own creation. Clark Gable wore charm like a crown, and the world called him their king. His smile disarmed doubt, his voice carried the weight of oak, and audiences believed he was as unshakable as the roles he played. Yet even kings walk on fragile ground. Behind the studio gates, indulgence was excused as destiny, and every misstep was covered by contracts written to protect the throne. He carried secrets like medals, polished but never spoken of. Affairs were buried in the shadows of studio backrooms, mistakes hushed before they reached the morning papers. They clapped when he entered the room, but no one noticed when he left. The role made him famous. It also broke him, for Rhett Butler was not just a character, it was an image he could never escape, a mask he was asked to wear long after the lights dimmed. His corruption was not the loud kind of scandal, but the quiet erosion of truth. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt. His reign glittered, but the crown was always cracked, reminding us that even kings of Hollywood were bound by the same bargain, to trade honesty for immortality. He taught the world to laugh without words, a small figure in a bowler hat, carrying the weight of human sorrow, with nothing more than a stumble, a glance, a hopeful smile. Charlie Chaplin was laughter made flesh, yet behind the mustache and cane stood a man whose silence concealed storms. He smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. The role made him famous. It also broke him. The tramp shuffled into hearts across continents, but Chaplin himself could not escape the compromises that fame demanded. He controlled every detail of his films, perfection etched into each frame, but the same grip often tightened on those around him. No one dared ask. He never told, until it was too late. They clapped when he entered the room, but no one noticed when he left. Scandals trailed him, whispers of impropriety and indulgence, tangled with politics and suspicion. Studios shielded him when profit was safe, and sharpened knives when the winds turned. His genius survived, but not without bruises, not without blurred lines between art and obsession, morality and desire. His name stayed on posters, but not always on forgiving lips. Chaplin's true story rests not in silence, but in the uneasy compromise that brilliance could never quite escape. Marilyn Monroe was the face of longing itself, eyes wide with promise, lips curved like an invitation the world could not refuse. She shimmered in gowns of sequins and diamonds, a dream stitched into silk, but beneath the glow was a girl who only wanted to be seen, not consumed. She smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. Producers molded her like clay, each role another mask, each contract another chain. Lovers claimed her brilliance, politics courted her allure, and corruption dressed it all as protection. For every spotlight, there were shadows of pills and loneliness waiting backstage. The role made her famous. It also broke her. The audience believed the kiss. But he'd already fallen out of love with her innocence, with her truth. Marilyn wanted to be a poet, a thinker, more than a fantasy. Instead, she became the most profitable illusion in Hollywood's arsenal. Her story was irony in motion. The more the world adored her innocence, the faster it was consumed. She glowed like a star, but the light was borrowed until it flickered out. He soared where others only dreamed, tracing arcs of steel and sky, a man whose fortune seemed limitless and whose vision reached beyond the horizon. Howard Hughes was wealth incarnate, a tycoon who could buy silence as easily as he bought aircraft, a producer who painted the heavens with glamour. He smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. The role made him famous. It also broke him. Beneath the brilliance lay a labyrinth of contracts, each one binding someone to his will. Women became possessions, employees became pawns, devotion purchased with checks and threats in equal measure. No one dared ask. He never told, until it was too late. They clapped when he entered the room, but no one noticed when he left. Excess became his kingdom, obsession its cruel throne. He built empires on the strength of vision, then dismantled his own life brick by brick, consumed by paranoia that no wealth could soothe. His name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those he loved. Howard Hughes, aviator of excess, lived a story that flickered between genius and corruption. He flew higher than anyone, yet fell into a cage of his own design, where fortune could not purchase freedom. Fatty Arbuckle once made the world laugh with a glance, a stumble, a perfectly timed fall that turned clumsiness into art. He was laughter in motion, a gentle giant who carried comedy on his shoulders. But laughter is fragile, and in 1921 it was smothered beneath headlines that turned joy into scandal. Accusations stormed through the press, his name dragged through courts and whispers alike. Though the verdict cleared him, corruption clung like a stain that could never be washed away. Studios panicked, lawyers bent truth into shapes that suited profit, and the same system that had made him a star dismantled him in the same breath. They clapped when he entered the room, but no one noticed when he left. The role made him famous. It also broke him. Arbuckle's laughter, once as natural as breath, dissolved into silence. His legacy tarnished not by guilt, but by suspicion. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore grief. His fall was more than a personal tragedy. It was Hollywood's first lesson that stardom could be devoured by a single headline. A king of comedy, undone not by the punchline but by the shadows behind the curtain. Her eyes were torches, her voice a blade. On screen, Bette Davis could turn a single glance into a weapon and a single word into a wound. She smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. The role made her famous. It also broke her. For behind the brilliance was a woman locked in combat with an industry that sought to tame her fire. She fought the studios with lawsuits and with sheer force of will, demanding roles that matched her talent. Yet no war is waged without scars. To win freedom, she sometimes paid in favors, forged alliances sharpened by necessity, bargains that left her both triumphant and trapped. No one dared ask. She never told, until it was too late. They clapped when she entered the room, but no one noticed when she left. Independence came, but it carried loneliness in its shadow. She battled corruption with corruption, wielding it as both shield and sword, until even victory felt like a wound. Her name stayed on posters, but not always on the lips of those she loved. Bette Davis lit the screen with fire, but the fire burned both ways, leaving behind not just legend, but ash. John Barrymore entered Hollywood as if born for its spotlight, carrying the weight of a name already carved into theatrical history. He was elegance wrapped in wit, a prince among performers, his voice deep as scripture and his gaze magnetic as flame. On stage and screen he seemed untouchable, a man gilded by legacy itself. Yet even legacies can fray. Alcohol whispered louder than applause. The more he drank, the more the industry bent itself to accommodate him. Contracts stretched, schedules flexed, directors sighed but signed again, because Barrymore's name still filled seats. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt. No one dared ask. He never told, until it was too late. The role made him famous. It also broke him, for the parts demanded the brilliance he was slowly squandering. Corruption was not his invention. It was his protection. Studios shielded him, not out of mercy, but out of profit. His decline became its own performance, a tragedy in slow motion. Each drink eroded a little more of the prince until only fragments remained, echoes of a once mighty voice carried off stage, leaving silence where royalty once stood. She walked into Hollywood with a smile that dared anyone to stop her and a wit that sliced through rules like butter. Mae West was rebellion wrapped in silk, every line a double entendre, every glance a spark of promise. She smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. The role made her famous. It also broke her. For behind the laughter was a woman who understood the stage was never free. It was bought, bargained, and bartered. She knew when to charm, when to bribe, when to twist the system until it bent beneath her heels. No one dared ask. She never told, until it was too late. They clapped when she entered the room, but no one noticed when she left. Her empire was built not just on talent, but on deals whispered behind closed doors, on influence wielded with a wink, on corruption worn openly, unapologetically. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. Mae West mocked the rules while relying on them, laughed at morality while using it as her mirror. She mastered Hollywood's corruption not by avoiding it, but by turning it into her stage, every compromise glittering like a jewel in her crown. Spencer Tracy stood on screen like a monument, steady, dignified, his words carrying the weight of truth itself. Audiences believed him instinctively, as though honesty had chosen him as its vessel. He seemed incorruptible, the embodiment of conscience in an era when heroes were carved in light. Yet shadows followed him quietly, and corruption worked not by scandal, but by silence. He smiled for the camera, and cried when it turned away. Off-screen, Tracy wrestled with drink, with affairs carefully concealed, with the torment of a double life maintained by the machinery that depended on his spotless image. Studios shielded him not to save his soul, but to preserve their profits. The role made him famous. It also broke him. The contrast was cruel. The man who played priests and fathers on screen was himself searching for forgiveness that never came. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt. And the silence that protected him became its own corruption, smoothing his path while stealing his peace. They clapped when he entered the room, but no one noticed when he left. What remained was a man revered by millions, yet haunted by shadows only he could see. She shimmered like moonlight, a vision too bright to question. Jean Harlow was the platinum blonde who redefined allure, innocence gilded in silver hair, sold to audiences as both angel and temptress. She smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. The role made her famous. It also broke her. Her rise was written not in her own hand, but in contracts inked by others. Relationships that sculpted her into an image she could not fully inhabit. Studios dictated her laugh, her look, her very presence, until the woman inside became a shadow behind the platinum glow. No one dared ask. She never told, until it was too late. They clapped when she entered the room, but no one noticed when she left. Her beauty was consumed like a commodity, fragile beneath the illusion, yet endlessly demanded. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. Jean Harlow's corruption was not scandalous but quiet, invisible, an iron cage painted in glamour. Her brilliance was her own, but the world she inhabited was constructed from illusions too heavy to escape. The silver shimmer endures, even as the woman herself flickered out far too soon. Marlon Brando arrived in Hollywood like a storm that refused to be contained. He spoke with silences as much as words, turned pauses into revelations, and forced truth into a medium built on artifice. He was the rebel the screen had been waiting for, the actor who made every performance feel dangerously alive. Yet rebellion carries its own corruption, and Brando was no exception. He fought the system openly, mocking its traditions, refusing its demands, reshaping its craft. But when the cameras stopped, he indulged in the very freedoms and excesses that system allowed. Affairs blurred across years, manipulations cloaked in charisma, contradictions forgiven because the art was too powerful to deny. The role made him famous. It also broke him. The irony was unshakable. The man who revealed Hollywood's falseness also lived inside it, wielding power as imperfectly as those he despised. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt. They clapped when he entered the room, but no one noticed when he left. Brando's rebellion was never pure. It was genius laced with compromise, a brilliance that changed the art forever, even as corruption threaded itself quietly through the legend he left behind. Her eyes were violet flames, rare as gemstones, and the world could not look away. Elizabeth Taylor shimmered through Hollywood like a queen in exile, draped in diamonds, her every gesture a headline. She smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. The role made her famous. It also broke her. For beneath the glamour was a woman both adored and condemned, protected and exploited, often in the same breath. Studios orchestrated her image, newspapers shadowed her steps, and she learned quickly that corruption was not an enemy but a tool. No one dared ask. She never told. Until it was too late. They clapped when she entered the room, but no one noticed when she left. Her loves and scandals became stagecraft, jewels glittering not just on her hands, but over the bargains she struck to survive. Her name stayed on posters, but not on the lips of those she loved. Taylor's genius lay in the irony of strength. She turned corruption into spectacle, shaping it until it became part of her crown. Both victim and architect, she carried the weight of her legend as if it were another jewel, dazzling, heavy, and impossible to set down. The curtain falls, the spotlights fade. What remains is silence, as heavy and golden as the dust drifting through an empty theatre. The faces we have wandered among tonight, radiant, flawed, immortal and broken, dissolve back into shadows. What lingers is not gossip nor scandal, but the fragile, dangerous beauty of illusion. Hollywood's golden age promised eternity, and in a way, it delivered. The reels still spin, the voices still echo, the laughter and the tears remain as bright as the day they were first projected. Yet, immortality is never free. Every smile we adored was purchased at a cost. Every legend constructed atop contracts that shackled freedom, indulgences that excused cruelty, or power wielded without mercy. She smiled for the camera and cried when it turned away. He wore tuxedos on screen. In real life, he wore guilt. Some of the stars we met fought corruption and lost. Others mastered it, learning to wear it as armor, and still others were destroyed quietly, their suffering hidden in dressing rooms while applause thundered outside. The role made them famous. It also broke them. What endures is not the corruption itself, but the humanity wrapped within it. Judy Garland's trembling voice can still break a heart in two, even as we know the price that was extracted from her innocence. Errol Flynn's grin remains forever luminous, though it masks a life untouchable by consequence. Clark Gable still stands tall as Rhett Butler, though the cracks in his crown whisper of the burdens he carried offstage. Joan Crawford's ambition burns on, fierce as a star that refuses to dim, even as it scorched those closest to her. Marilyn Monroe still glows, more myth than woman now, her light flickering with both glamour and grief. They clapped when she entered the room, but no one noticed when she left. The irony of Hollywood's golden age is this: the very illusions that comforted millions also devoured those who created them. The audience believed the kiss, but he'd already fallen out of love. In watching them, we were offered escape. In living for us, they lost pieces of themselves. Yet perhaps that is why we return to their films again and again. Because within the beauty and the brokenness, we glimpse something true. We see ourselves, our own longings, our own contradictions, our own hunger to be loved, no matter the cost. The stars were not gods, though they looked like them. They were human beings who bore the unbearable weight of being symbols. And in their humanity, both corrupted and luminous, they remind us that dreams are always dangerous, but they are also always necessary. The curtain has closed, but their light lingers, scattered across memory, flickering in midnight screenings, glowing in the hushed reverence of those who still whisper their names. The illusion was dangerous, yes, but oh, how beautiful it was. And so we leave the theatre quietly, carrying both the brilliance and the shadows with us, knowing that in every story of corruption lies not condemnation, but the bittersweet echo of being human beneath the stars.